Hey, welcome to the GP Podcast. This year at Grace Pointe, we're focusing on one thing, becoming more like Christ by really leaning into his character. Each month, our pastors have been discussing a different attribute of who Christ is and teaching us how to grow that same attribute in our own lives. But here's the thing, not everything makes it into those final sermons. And that is where this podcast called Side Notes comes in. Each month, Pastors Dan Painter and Jared Seeland will join us and share some of their stories and thoughts and interesting tidbits that didn't quite make it to the stage. It could be some of their personal experiences as well, or challenges that they've seen pop up in culture, or just extra notes from their prep. Think of it as the stuff that was left on the cutting room floor. Still really good, just, not part of the final message. So let's jump in and chat about last month's theme. Plus, of course, here's some of the side notes from our pastors. Welcome back to the GP Podcast. I'm Dan Royal, the host, and we're really glad that you're back with us. Hopefully you've been gleaning a lot of information over the last couple ones that we've done. We're doing something a little bit different today. Same kind of thing that we always do, except a different person here. We have Dan Painter with us as usual, but today filling in for Jared Seeland, we have Executive Pastor Jim George. Thanks for joining us today.
It's great to be here, and I am a different person. So
it is true.
I am.
It is true, but we're glad that you're here and glad for Jared.
Yeah.
Jared and his wife just had their new baby, and excited for them. We miss him, but excited for them and excited to be able to be here today. So
it's adding a different shade of something. I don't know what, but we'll find out as we talk.
More perspectives.
Right?
I think
more perspectives and insights.
I think I'll be funnier than
there you go.
Yes, yeah.
That's what
You're
we're
probably
looking for.
deeper.
I'll probably
more insightful.
Yeah, all those things. Yes.
Excellent. Well, the topic for this podcast is good and angry. That was our topic for last month, and let's just start off with the basic question that I think was the big goal here, was to discover the process of being angry, like Jesus is angry, so that we do it in the right way. And I think it's pretty commonplace for most people to assume anger is bad, anger is sinful. But there's a place and a time for anger in everybody's life, and deciphering how that works, I think, is the important part. And I think that's what you guys covered the most of. So why don't we start there for somebody that's just tuning in for the first time? What is being good and angry, and how does that work out exactly?
This series for me was a surprise in terms of how well it was received, how much people, I think, felt they needed it.
Yeah.
I just wasn't expecting the response, especially when we spent 5 weeks on it. And yet, at the same time, realizing that this is something that we all deal with. We all have anger in our lives.
Yeah.
And to varying degrees, we tend to only think of anger in its extreme forms. But in the same way that fear can be expressed in things like worry or in anxiety, anger can be expressed in minor annoyances, frustrations, irritations. And if we look at it through that lens, and anger is something that we're dealing with pretty frequently in the world. And you're absolutely right, is that our tendency is to think that anger is always bad. In fact, many of us maybe have been taught that to be a good Christian, you have to have the absence of anger. And yet it's clearly not what Scripture teaches, right? There are times when anger is absolutely wrong. And there are other times where it's absolutely wrong to not be angry. The encouragement of Paul in Ephesians is be angry, don't sin. So you need to get angry. And of course, Jesus is setting the example for us, right? So I think if I were going to summarize, I'm getting around to answering your question. If I were to summarize, what does it mean to be good and angry? I think good anger is an expression of right love. Right? It is bad anger is an expression of dysfunctional love. When I love in the way that I should love, I'll get angry in the way that I should get angry. When I am loving in a way that is broken and dysfunctional, my anger is dysfunctional. Anger is not the opposite of love. It's not the absence of love. Apathy is the absence of love. Anger is actually an expression of love. It's just a question of, is my love the right kind of love, right? Am I loving selflessly? Am I loving like Jesus? Or am I loving selfishly?
One of the things that I learned in this process, I think I helped teach it a little bit, but I learned in this process is that anger is tied to all of those other things. When we talk about love, when we talk about compassion, when we talk about faithfulness, that one of the things that, or the way that Jesus got angry is oftentimes at the absence of those other things. And so it isn't just don't get angry, right?
Sure.
With all of the other ones, it was we need more. We need to add more love. We need to add more compassion. We need to add more faithfulness. We need to add more peace, and we do. With anger, I thought it was going to only be dialing back the anger. Okay, I need to become less angry, and it turns out that isn't the case. I need to be angrier. One of the things I learned is I need to be angrier at some of the things that are happening in my life or around me in our society that I haven't been as angry about as I should. And there is also the opposite. I also probably get angry at things I shouldn't, for sure, maybe to a degree. But it's also, that if that bothered Jesus enough to be angry, it should bother me enough to be angry.
I think one of you also said the statement, if you're not getting angry at what God would be getting angry at, then you're missing out there too.
Yeah. Well, I would say the absence of, if I'm not getting angry at what God is gets angry about, which by the way, that's the test. Is it good anger? Here's the ultimate test. Yeah. Does God get angry about this? Does this thing make God angry? Does he get angry about this? If he's not angry about it, then I shouldn't be angry about it, right? But if he gets angry about it and I'm not, I mean, look, if he loves and I don't love in the way that he loves, would we not say that would be sin? Yeah. Right. And so if he gets angry, and this is like, I'm hesitating saying it because it's like, again, I grew up thinking that, no, I don't get angry. That's how you, but if he gets angry and I don't, if he looks at the brokenness of this world, if he looks at sin, if I don't get angry about that, then I would argue there's a sinfulness in that because I am not like him. I'm not imitating him in the way that I should be.
Okay, so from there, then let's get back to the main point of the podcast, is to look at those notes and those things that you were hoping to get into the sermon during that month that just never made it. Yeah. What are some of those items? And then eventually I want to get back onto what we were discussing and take a look at the really common illustration of Jesus being angry, being in the temple, and how you explained that and how you guys talked through that a little bit. But before we get to that, what are some of the things that you were hoping to get into your sermons that you were like, you know what, I'm not going to have time. This would have been ideal, but we ran out of time.
I would say one of the big pieces that, and it actually was a question that was asked the very first week. I had somebody come up to me, actually first service, first week, came up and said, what about getting angry at God? I was with my small group. I don't remember exactly how they asked it, but they were with their small group talking about this and talking about how, get angry with God, and that's okay because God can handle it. And, is it okay for me to get angry with God? And I thought, man, that is it's a great question. It's a common question. And I think there are some common misperceptions and some bad teaching in regard to answering that question. And gladly we answered it. We just answered at the very end of at the very end of the month.
I'm not going to get political here, but in this political state that we're in, there's a lot of anger, and there has been for some months now. So how did you go about answering that question for her?
In that moment, it was a pretty brief conversation because we were in between services, but I just said it very succinctly, said, when I get angry, I think we all do along the way get angry with God.
Sure.
Right. I don't think it's an unusual thing for us. Part of the reason we get angry with God is because we're finite creatures who have a very limited perspective, but we think we know everything.
Yep.
Right. We're like children. Like I know everything. Yep. And because I know everything, if it doesn't, and it doesn't happen the way that I think it should happen, then my response is, God got it wrong. I might not actually say those words, right, but when I get angry with God, that's really what I'm saying. Like, God got this wrong. He messed this up. He didn't do things the way that I wanted him to do it. Are there going to be times where I'll have an anger towards God because of something that is wrong with me? Yes. Every time I get angry with God, the problem isn't God. The problem is me. It's my perspective. It's my perception of reality. I mean, look, you go to Job. The oldest book in the Bible that we have is a story about a man who goes through unbelievable suffering and is wrestling with that suffering as people are like challenging him and calling him out. And the conclusion of the story is not that God goes, okay, let me explain to you everything that happened. The conclusion of the story is basically God going, hey, by the way, I'm God. Yeah. Right? I'm in charge, and it's a challenge to trust me. even if you cannot understand, even if it doesn't make sense to you right now. And trust that I'm good, I'm doing good, and will do good, even as hard as this is. And Jesus, I think, really shows us that through the story of Lazarus, right? Yeah. Jesus finds out Lazarus is going to die, doesn't go, he waits. Intentionally. Lazarus dies while he's waiting, shows up 4 days after Lazarus has died, knowing exactly what's happened. And by the way, knowing exactly what he's going to do, which the end of the story is resurrection. But Jesus at the tomb of Lazarus gets angry in that moment. And who's he angry with? He's not angry with himself. He's not angry at the Father. He's not angry because he's going, well, we had a bad plan, or I showed up late. No, this was intentional. It's not a bad plan. It wasn't late. He wasn't bad with his timing. So then what's Jesus angry about? Jesus is angry about the brokenness and the dysfunction of a world that has been infected and impacted by sin, and angry at the enemy, who ultimately is at the root cause. And so when I look at answering that question, should I get angry with God? I think the answer is no. I shouldn't get angry with God, because God is good. He has promised that he's doing good. He's sovereign in charge over all of this, even if I don't understand it. That doesn't mean I shouldn't get angry. Jesus still gets angry, but it's, where does my anger go? What am I directing that at? Yeah. And the enemy loves to manipulate that to go, get angry with God. Like, if he's so good, where's he at, right? But who's the one who's, if you read the book of Job, who's the one behind, ultimately, the one who is inflicting the harm and doing it's always the enemy. Yeah. And so going, listen, who are we getting angry with? Right. And then what do we do with that anger? Right. Yep. And so, no, my challenge is, when I'm angry with God, I have to recognize that there's something wrong in me. And I have to come with the honesty and humility. I don't think you can't pretend with God. God already knows you're angry with him, right? And certainly God can handle the anger of finite beings. Sure, yeah, right. Right, so it's not that God can't handle it, and God already knows it, but I think I have to come with honest humility that says, God, I am struggling, and I am angry, and some of that anger is directed towards you because I think I know what's best. Yeah. But I know what the truth ultimately is I don't know. Yep. And I know that you're good. You've proven I can trust you. You've proven it through the cross. Yeah. If he can use the ultimate evil to bring about the ultimate good, then I can trust him in the hard things that I'm going through, in the pain that I'm going through. And so, Lord, I'm repenting of that. And then I said the morning I preached, I think the prayer is, I do believe, help my unbelief, because that's the root problem. Yep. When I'm angry with God, it's because I'm not believing. But then I got to turn that anger in the right direction. I got to turn it towards sin. I got to turn it towards the enemy, and then I act in the next steps that come out of that. Yeah. Again, I really believe we're living at a time where there's a lot of popular teaching, counseling out there that encourages us to get angry at God. And I'm just going, man.
Well, it encourages not just get angry at God, but get angry. Like, your feelings, trust them. They help you. They're there for a reason. If you're feeling it, it must be true. At least it's true for you. And you're right. What the it's correct teaching. It's just incomplete teaching that God can take your anger. Of course he can take it. He's not going to be offended. Yeah. But that should be, just as you said, that should be an indication that you need to do a little inventory on, maybe it's a humility inventory, and say, okay, great. Be thankful that you noticed you were just mad at God. That should be screaming, you're lacking humility. At least in this instance, you're lacking it.
I'm not going to talk really long on this, but I think this is worth...
Too late.
That's good. But I think this is a really important point, because part of why do we get angry with God? We get angry with God because we're going through hard things, and we're going, if God was all loving and all powerful, then why didn't he stop this? Yep. And this is a great question, but it's missing the rest of the equation, right? This is a really popular question. This is a question that atheists asks. Why is there suffering? If God is all powerful and he's all loving, then there shouldn't be suffering. But it leaves out the part of the equation that God is also all wise. He's all knowing. And so if God is all loving and all powerful, and also he knows everything, he knows what we need and what's best, then we can trust when suffering happens. There's a reason for it. In fact, Peter says, you only suffer as needed. It's as necessary, right? You're going through this. Why? Because you need it. It's Joseph going through all the things that he went through so that he'd be ready to be at the top of Pharaoh's government, so that he would be able to manage the resources during a famine so thousands of people could be saved. But if he didn't go through all the hard things, he never would have been ready for it. right?
Yep.
And so you're going, listen, I'm going through this. It's hard. I don't understand. It's Jesus talking to the disciples in John 13, verse 7, where he says, you don't understand what's happening right now, but one day you will. I may not be able to see it right now, and it's hard. And I feel like there are times like Paul, where he goes, I'm being stretched to the point of even death itself. I'm being pulled apart.
Yeah.
But what's happening in the process? God is working, and he's doing his promises. He's engaged, he's involved, it's intentional, and it's good, even if you can't understand it right now, even if you can't see it. There's a great story. It's the last thing I'll say, and then I'll...
Well, he's also just, though. And so
Yes,
sometimes a lot of the suffering is just, it's a natural consequence of our own sin.
Right.
And so, yeah, it probably is good for a longer term, but there's also, he's also going to allow bad things happen when we've deserved to have bad things happen.
Totally. Like there's this, and the story, there's a story that I didn't tell. I think I've told it before, I'm certain, but it's a story from Elizabeth Elliot, whose husband went to reach onto the mission field in Ecuador to reach an unreached tribe and ended up being killed. She married again. Her second husband, I believe, died of cancer. And she tells a story of a time that she went to I think it's in Scotland, a Scottish sheep farm. And the shepherd, she shows up at this sheep farm, and the shepherd is taking these sheep one at a time and throwing them into this vat of liquid. And they're struggling to get out of this vat of liquid, and he's taking them and literally pushing them all the way under the water, head, everything, completely submerging them in this liquid in this vat. And they'd try to get out. There was a dog that was barking at them when he tried to get out the other side and keeping them in this water. And she said, as I'm watching this, it looks like the shepherd is trying to kill these sheep. And if you're the sheep, you've got to be thinking, what is my shepherd doing to me? He's killing me.
Yeah.
But what she discovered was that the vat was a vat of antiseptic, and that sheep get these parasites on their body, and that if the shepherd does not immerse them fully into the antiseptic, the parasites will literally eat them from the outside in. And so in order to save them, he's not killing them, he's actually saving them. But at that time, you're the sheep, or you're from, Elizabeth Elliot looking at it, you're going, that shepherd's trying to kill them.
Yeah.
No, he's actually trying to save them. And so there are times where he's allowing us to go through it for the positive training, right? Developing things in us that we need. Or, Jim, to your point of going, there's times I've got sin in my life, and the only way it gets cleaned out if I'm getting confronted. So he's submerging me. He's taking me through the furnace of affliction because I need to go through this. But the point either way is I need to go through it. It is for my good. And therefore, when I'm getting angry with God, I'm getting angry with the one he's bringing me through this to save me.
Yeah.
And it really comes down to, it's really because I just don't have the perspective.
Yeah.
And so what do I need? I need faith, which, again, rooted in his word, but especially, Paul, Romans chapter 8 saying, if he who did not spare his own son, but gave him up for us, can we not trust him to give us everything, right? Can we not trust him in these things? If he would do that for us, why would he then take us and drown us, right?
Yeah.
To do evil to us if he would do that to save us.
Well, some of the wisest people I know are the ones that have been through it all.
Right.
Because they've had those experiences, they can speak into it. And it comes from all of that pain and hurt that they've suffered through. And at the time, I'm sure they asked all the same questions. This isn't fair. I don't understand. I'm really angry with the situation. I'm angry at God. But how you deal, like you said, how you deal with it and accepting and being humble and realizing, oh, wait, I don't know everything. I'm not the wise one here. God is the wise one. I have to get through this to the other side.
I think it's important to say that there are people who might listen to this and hear this and think, well, it sounds very harsh.
It's hard.
Like
or,
you don't
it's
know
easy
what
for you
I'm
guys
going
to say
through.
that
Yeah, it's
now,
easy
but
to
you don't
say
know.
it. And I would say, well,
Yeah.
it's not so easy to say, in the sense that, both Jim and I have been through our own things, and right, we've faced some really deep challenges. I've had to deal with my own anger along the way in those things. And while I might not understand what every single person is going through, I understand the struggle, I understand the anger, I understand the natural tendency that we have, as I said, to get angry with God. But I would just say, look, God understands. God understands better than we understand that he understands. Right? God understands. And I love the fact that in the John 11, when at the death of Lazarus, they're angry with Jesus that he didn't show up on time. You got it wrong.
Yep.
And yet
Where were
Jesus
you?
doesn't like lash out.
Yeah.
He doesn't get offended. He doesn't get angry with them. Instead, he weeps with them, right? And then reminds them of the truth and ministers to them in the middle of it. And so, God, I don't think it's right for us to get angry with God. I think that's pride. And I think it's sin. But at the same time, I also think we have a natural tendency to get angry with God. And we need to repent of that. But I love the fact that what God shows us is that he meets us with patience, mercy, and grace, and teaches us the truth in the middle of all of that. And he is gently leading us even when we're being unhealthy
Irrational.
children.
Yeah.
Well, we got to remember this isn't a sermon series about anger. It's a sermon series about watching Jesus, learning about Jesus, and imitating Jesus. And one thing we don't see, we see lots of instances of him getting angry, but he's not getting angry at God the Father.
Yeah.
And so we don't need a whole lot of evidence to say, okay,
True.
that would be wrong.
I know we're in a different sermon series currently, but the illustration that you gave on Sunday about the youth pastor getting under the table, it just popped into my head now when you were talking about Lazarus and Jesus stopping and weeping with them and being in that moment with them. He understands that they're not wise, they don't know what's going on, but he meets them where they're at.
Yeah. Well, he understands that I think it's Psalm 103. He understands that we're dust. He understands that we're flesh and blood. Yep. He recognizes our tendency towards foolishness, is, I would say, the way that I would almost translate that. Like, it's kind of like the way that we are with our little kids, right?
Yeah,
when our
parents.
children, because like every parent somewhere along the way has had their kids angry with them, right? I don't want to eat my vegetables, or especially when they're small, and you're like, you just don't get it.
Yeah.
You don't understand now, but someday you'll probably say thank you.
Yeah.
And I do look. I've experienced that not just with my kids, but in my relationship with God. I've been through my seasons where I've been angry at God in pride, and later on down the road said thank you. And I think the challenge all of us is to learn how to say thank you at the beginning in faith.
So let's go ahead and move on to the question I posed earlier. Let's get back to Jesus showing us an example of being angry in a righteous way, of being in the temple, upturning the tables, walking through there. And from the perspective that we read in the scripture, it seems like, whoa, this is action. This is anger in action. This is like, I could do this. And he's saying this is okay for me to like throw things around the house, but that's not what's going on here. We know that, but how would you explain that to somebody in less than the amount of time it took you for the sermon when you were preaching it?
I can't do that.
Okay. Next question.
No, I'll preach. A lot of times we read that passage and we go, man, I want to start flipping some tables. Like, I want to start turning over some tables. And we have to remember that Jesus came to the temple as the Lord of the temple. Yep. Not as like just a temple goer.
He wasn't visiting.
Right. Yeah. Not just another person at the temple. This is the Lord of the temple, who the temple is meant to honor. And by the way, the temple is meant to be pointing directly to him. The one who everybody's meant to be worshiping shows up and nobody's worshiping him.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
So it's a complete, we have to be careful that we're not putting ourselves into that position. Yep. Right. And part of the way we don't put ourselves in that position is before we start thinking about which tables we want to flip over in everybody else's lives or in our own churches, is to make sure that the first place that we're submitting to the flipping over of tables is in our own hearts. It's starting with our own worship. That's what Jesus is addressing in that moment. There's a dysfunctional worship that is actually distracting the people who are there to worship in the court of the Gentiles. He's flipping over tables because it's keeping people from true worship and because it's keeping them from the truth.
But the reason he flipped over tables is the same reason he got angry in most of these. Yeah. And I mean, what you just described. Yeah. In most of the instances that we talked about in this sermon series, it was that. It was his plan, his intention is being totally derailed.
Yeah, people are being kept from the truth from him, because of whatever it is that's
Right.
going on in that
Right.
situation, whether it be the disciples keeping children out, whether it be the Pharisees angry about the man with the withered hand, whether it be the worship in the temple.
It's that distraction. You're distracting from what needs to be happening.
You're getting in the way of people actually. I mean, this
Yeah.
was the whole problem with the Pharisees, wasn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, they're actually keeping people from the truth, not leading people to the truth. And these are the shepherds that are supposed to
But
be
these are
doing
the people that signed up to use the truth
Right.
to have the law be fulfilled. Like
Right.
they signed up to say, yeah, we want this to happen. We want God's purposes to take place, and it's those same people that are jumping in the way of it happening.
Totally.
And that makes Jesus mad, and it should make us just as mad.
Totally.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's it does apply to us personally. We make it impersonal, and that's the temple and it's dysfunctional worship, but I think of it in the New Testament, 1 Corinthians 6. Do you not know that your body is the temple of the Holy Spirit? Where's the temple now? Right? The church building is not the new temple, right?
Yeah.
We go to these temples. No, my body is the temple of the Holy Spirit. So
Yeah.
wherever I go as a believer, it's a place of worship, right?
Yep.
In terms of my life. And add on to that we are the priesthood of believers. So First Peter 2, we're to be calling people to worship as we declare his excellency. And so here's the question we should be asking. How's the worship at the temple? Right? How's the worship in am I pointing people to him, or am I distracting people from him? Is my life getting in the way of the truth, or is my life actually leading people to the truth? And so before I start, this gets into Matthew chapter 7. Before you take the speck out of your brother's eye, you better be dealing with a log in your own eye.
Sure. Yeah.
Before you address everybody else's worship, you better be examining your own. Because if you don't, then your anger towards somebody else and their dysfunctional worship will be prideful, arrogant, and destructive. But if I am coming and dealing with my dysfunctional, and by the way, everybody has dysfunctional worship because everybody has sin. Sin is an expression of dysfunctional worship. I have loved something more than I loved God. That's why I've sinned. So everybody has it. So I've got to be dealing with that first. Jesus needs to be confronting and flipping tables in my heart. I need to be submitting to that, repenting of that before I go anywhere else.
That flipping of the table is kind of the iconic example of Jesus getting angry, right? I mean, it's the one that most people know. And I think it is iconic, and they know it for a really bad reason. And they think, oh, this is where Jesus loses it.
Yeah.
And he never loses it. Like he's not out of control. He's not just like going nuts. Like he is still in full control of his emotions. And I think sometimes we associate or think of it as like, I can relate. Yeah, I lose my temper. I do things that are crazy. And finally Jesus is doing the same thing. It's like, no, you missed the whole thing.
Right.
Yeah.
Like he was under complete control of what he was doing.
I love the fact you come to God's word and, there are passages you've read lots of times before, but not actually, there's things that you miss. There's always more. You never come to the end of it.
Yep.
Right? There's always more. And this time around, to see that the whip that he makes out of cords, the word for cords is the same as rushes. A rush is it's not like a strong, thick plant, but he makes a whip by weaving these rushes together. And so the whip was not designed to do damage. It wasn't designed to do harm. And we miss that because we think of it like Jesus in with a bullwhip.
He's whipping
People are bleeding, screaming,
going
and
down.
crying and running because he is blowing everything up with this whip. And it's not why people aren't running out of fear of the whip. Why are they running? They're running because the Lord of the temple has the authority in that moment. He's different than the Pharisees. And they even say it early on in his ministry. This is somebody who teaches with authority, unlike our teachers, which talk about a really hard slam for all those guys. Like, great, thank you. But, they're going, he's got authority. So he comes into the temple with authority. That's what ultimately is what drives the people out. Not this. He's not doing damage. He's not out of control.
Right.
Yeah.
He has self-control in the whole thing. And by the way, if he really was coming in without, if he'd lost it, which again, he never would, but if he really came in without control, we're talking end times.
Oh, yeah.
Right? We're talking about the final judgment. We're talking about Armageddon, right?
Yeah.
Nobody stands.
No.
So if Jesus had really lost it, that's not what happened.
Throwing over a couple tables.
Flipping tables, isn't it?
Let's look at an example from our own lives. So is there a time in your own life where you're kind of like, yes, when I was preaching this, I was thinking I had this instance in my head and I was like, yeah, this is like, I'm drawing from this experience and this was something that I learned. Is there something that you can share from your own life that you were like, yep, this is where I learned this lesson, or God taught me here? Or personally, I just had one myself last night with my son. He was ticked off. I put some limits on him. He's been tired a lot recently, and I found out, well, it's because he's been getting up at 5 and working out downstairs. And it's all kind of making sense now. And so we had the talk, we talked through it, and thankfully in the moment, I didn't lose my anger, but I guess this is more from his perspective. But he after dinner, he went out for a walk, and he's like, I'm going for a walk. Well, the rule of thumb is you got to be home before dark, right? We don't do the whole 80s thing. It's 10 o'clock at night. You know where your children are. It's when the lights are on, you're coming home. So he came in. I had assumed he was already home, and that wasn't a thing. He comes walking in at like almost 9 o'clock. I was like, whoa, where have you been? So ensues the discussion. And so looking back on that, I'm glad in the moment I didn't get overly angry, but I've had plenty of instances with him in the past where I have, and hearing the different parts of you guys speak and your messages, I can think of those times where I'm like, whoa, I lost it here or I lost it there. And it's hard, especially being in that parenting relationship where you're just kind of like, darn it, I'm done. And you've lost this. And then 2 days later, you're like, okay, I overreached it. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Whereas we can look to Christ as that example of not losing it in those moments. And he never walked away from that instance in the temple where he was like, I shouldn't have done that. Mm-hmm. Instead, years later, thousands of years later, now we see it as an example. So are there any examples in your life where you're like, yeah, no, this was something that I went through that I can share with somebody that's listening, that, we're all in this together. We're all learning this together.
My big learning from this series wasn't that I get too angry too often. It's that there are things that should anger me that don't. So I will give you an example. There's a number of people at Grace Pointe that aren't serving anywhere. There are people in my family that aren't serving anywhere. And for a long time, and there are also probably opportunities that I have to serve myself that I don't, that I'll pass on, or that I'm really too busy doing this. I don't have time for this. Sure. And when you look at the giftedness that God's given people, the calling that he's put on them, the opportunities to use gifts and to serve the church, just as an example, that get passed by. Yeah. I think sometimes it's even conscious, where it's just like, oh, just be gracious. It's the loving thing to do, to let that go. And there is an unloving way to address it, for sure, but it needs to be addressed. Like this is the example. At least the week that I preached, it was about Jesus getting angry at the Pharisees for having a hardened heart because they made up this set of rules or excuses that would prevent Jesus from healing a withered man's hand. Yeah. And so and so it's like, no, he has the ability to do it. He can do it, but you've made up these other reasons that you're going to get mad at him for doing it. Well, God gives the people of Grace Pointe abilities and giftedness to do it, to do things. And we have all, to differing degrees, including me and my family, made up reasons to not do something in particular. And I have felt it is gracious and loving to let that go. And meanwhile, unbeknownst to maybe any of us, Jesus is mad, right? And
I've given you talents and you're not using them.
A waste.
Yeah.
A waste. Like this, we, the church, are God's plan of growing his church. And when we say, nah, it's not loving to let that just go, right? There is a loving way. And this goes back to what you said early on, that being angry and being loving, those two things go together very, very nicely, much better than I thought they did. There is a loving way to be angry at myself, at people that we can come alongside and say, no, let me help you with this. Not only do we not want Jesus angry by us not serving the way he's called us to serve, we want to do that service, and we want to be fueled, even if it's fueled by godly anger, righteous anger, to help other people serve as well.
And find their spot.
Way too, what's that?
Find their spot.
Exactly right. Exactly right. So I think, what have I been working on? I've been working on trying to make sure I have a much healthier balance between anger and love for him, love for the work he's given us to do, appreciation for the giftedness that he's given all of us, and making sure that gets channeled to serve and to love.
Just in follow up to that, and then I have an example, is I would see this in when Paul confronts Peter, talks about the confrontation between Paul and Peter in Galatians chapter 2, where is it Galatians 2 or Galatians 1? Anyways, where Peter has, because of the influence of the Judaizers, right, these legalistic Jews, compromised in the community by cutting himself off from the Gentiles, right? So he's not doing what he should be doing, not functioning in relationship to the believers in the way that he should. And Paul goes, and I confronted him to his face. Like, we're not like, and you go, wait a minute, that's not very nice. And see, that's the problem. We've associated love and niceness, and if you're nice, you're not going to get angry. Yeah. Right? And it's like, well, Christianity isn't about being nice. We want to be kind, but we want to be loving. And if I really love Peter, if Paul really loves Peter and Jesus and the church and the mission, then what are you going to do? I'm not letting that go. I'm not going to be like arrogant. Again, I've got to do the Matthew 7. I've got to deal with my own sin first. Right. Then I'll be able. All right, Jesus doesn't say don't go and deal with other people's sin. He says deal with yours first, then you'll be able to do it. Why? Because I'll go with gentleness, and I'll go with humility, and I'll go with kindness, and I'll go with compassion, not some arrogant, bull in a china shop thing, right? Yeah. I had an experience this weekend. So I think parenting is a great place to experience and to learn and to practice right anger. Experience this weekend with one of my boys, and I'm going to call out all my grievances and name each of them with my children. No,
I hope they're listening.
I hope you're listening to this, son. An experience where things did not go the way they should have. He did something that was wrong, and I was driving to go and pick him up. And on the ride there, I'm like, man, I'm angry. And I was angry. I was hot. I'm not going to lie. I was pretty upset, and but gladly, I had time. And that's actually one of the rules. That's James. Be slow to anger, right? Quick to listen, slow to speak, slow to get angry. You got to slow down. That's part of our problem, is we just rush. We let it be like this, steam engine that's just driving me, right? And it's like, no, I'm going to put on the brakes. I need to slow down. I need to process before I respond, because I don't want to respond in anger. In fact, at the end of the day, there were consequences for what happened, but I didn't institute any consequences until I calmed down, because I wanted to have the conversation in the right way, in the right place. But I had to slow down, and the drive gave me the time to do that, which is good. But what I realized is that there's this tension in me between the question that I had to wrestle with is, why am I angry? What am I most angry about? Am I angry about the fact that this is inconvenience to my life? Right? This has affected me. Is that what I'm primarily angry about? Which, if I was honest, and I had to be honest in the moment, you lie to yourself, you're crazy. Right. It was like, that's actually primarily what I'm not angry about. What this, how this has affected our relation. I'm not angry about what this means about kind of where he is spiritually. It's not out of concern for him. It's out of self-concern, out of self-focus that I'm angry. And that needs to change. That needs to adjust before I have a conversation, because if I'm going into this angry because of how it's affected me, it'll be unrighteous anger expressed in an unhelpful, unhealthy, dysfunctional, destructive way. But if I can actually get angry over the right thing in this moment, then I'll go at this conversation is going to be completely different. And it's not that it won't be hard. And it's not that it won't be uncomfortable. It's not that there won't be confrontation, but it'll be redemptive. It'll be for the purpose of his good, and not about my inconvenience. It'll be, listen, I want you healthy, and I want you living, and this is not the way. And so there's consequences, not because I'm punishing you because you've inconvenienced me, but because I'm trying to train you in righteousness. I'm trying to train you in the right way, Right. So that just a recent application of it for me.
That's good. Well, thanks, guys. It was great discussion. I think it's always good. I love these moments to look back on what you've talked about, what you've discussed, and hopefully if you're listening right now, you've gleaned some information from this as well, and you know that it's okay to get angry if you do it the right way, if you do it like Christ does. So yeah, thanks for joining us, Jim, and filling in for Jared for this month, and we appreciate your wisdom and your insight, and
a lot of fun. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. And Dan, of course, always great having you here too.
It's been great. Thanks for hosting the conversation. I appreciate it.
Awesome. Thank you.
Great.
Well, next month is follow through. We're going to look at how Christ follows through with his ministry. And if you haven't had a chance to listen to the most recent sermons, go to gpn.church /sermons, and you'll get more information there for our campus here. And then we have more information online through Plainfield, gpp.church. Look for their sermons there. If you ever get behind, that's where you can go to look up our sermons and get caught up. So thanks again for listening, and we're looking forward to our next podcast. See you then.